Welcome to AUA Leadership in Business, an official podcast of the American Urological Association.
Welcome to the AUA Leadership in Business podcast, where urologic professionals experience the practical application of business acumen essential for success in today's dynamic professional landscape. I'm Dr. Jennifer Miles-Thomas, and in today's episode, we will discuss the best ways of communicating your ideas to your team. Joining me today for this discussion is Dr. Christopher Gonzalez. Dr. Gonzalez is the chair of urology at Loyola University Medical Center in Maywood, Illinois. He also serves as the chief of surgery for the medical center. He is also a trustee of the American Board of Urology and is the chair of the ABU Certifying Examination Committee. He is also a great dad to 5 kids. Welcome, Dr. Gonzalez.
Thank you. Very kind of you to say that.
It's important. You're a great person, great background, and doing great for our community. So today's conversation is how to communicate to your team. Our overall goal is to talk about ways to help with professional development and leadership. So if we kind of go back to the basics, what is the most important attribute of a good leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a few things, and I think the psych literature also kind of supports these things, but I think number one is adaptability. I think we all know that since the pandemic. I think we know that you just don't know what's going to come in the front door every day, and just the ability to adapt to that. We all have shortages of staff. We all have shortages of anesthesiologists and these types of things. So we can complain about it, we can be upset about it, but we got to do something about it at the end. So there's a new normal. And I think the quicker we understand there's a new normal, I think the better we're going to do. Problem solving goes along right with that. It's another important attribute as well. I think just the ability to think through things quickly and think through scenarios, and experience gives you a big hand on that too as well. As far as, I've seen this problem before, but sometimes we see things we don't, and we just have to think off the cuff a little bit. But just always trying to do the right thing for the patient and always trying to do the right thing for our faculty are good guiding principles there. Empathy is something that I think is very important, and we forget about a little bit. So what you want to do is if you're dealing with somebody and there's a problem, is you want to put yourself in their shoes, put yourself in their place, and then kind of that might help you get a little bit of insight into what the problem is and what the issue is as well. And then finally, communication, right? I think that's one of the most important things. And I had when I went to Kellogg, I had a accounting teacher that said, "You're not going to remember anything I said. You're going to forget it all. But I want you to remember one thing: different costs for different purposes," which was part of the accounting lesson. And we would say it over and over again, and we said it at the beginning of each class. And I can remember that 20 plus years from now. So if there's 3 things I really want from this podcast for people to remember, are that great leaders are great communicators. It's not an accident. Great leaders ask the tough questions that need to be asked, and great leaders are great listeners. And I think that's probably the most important of the 3, is just being a really great listener. So if you get it, you can forget everything else I said, but if you can remember those 3 things, I think that's the most important thing of this podcast.
No, I completely agree. I know definitely we're going to talk about communication, but do you have any suggestions of just how can we be more adaptable? Because I agree. During COVID, we all had to pivot because we were all in the exact same position, right? There were so many unknown variables in the world, and we didn't get direct guidance. There's no way to forecast what was happening. But a lot of times we see ourselves as leaders sometimes being a little bit more rigid. So how can we learn, how can we work on being adaptable? Because one of the other, challenges we have as the next generation comes, they do things a little bit differently. They look at the world a little bit differently. And I don't want to say I'm the older generation, but I feel like I'm kind of that mid-career older generation where I'm learning to think about things differently, and it's uncomfortable. So any suggestions you have about how to be a little bit more adaptable?
Yeah, that's another great question. I would say that it's kind of like I find it akin to when I go to the airport. I know I lose all control, right? I know whatever happens is going to happen. And if you get too emotionally involved and my plane's delayed or it's not coming or it got canceled, then I think, and I'm not saying you have to lose all control when you come to work, but I think a little bit it's going to be about empowerment of the people that you work with. And I think giving them more responsibility. And I think that's important, and also just to take the pressure off yourself and know that, as a leader, I'm going to make mistakes. and the people that I work with are going to make mistakes. But so long as we both recognize that and understand how to fix them, I think that that's going to be the key. But I do think trying to micromanage and control every aspect of what's going on, it'll give you an ulcer because things are not going to work out the way they need to work out, right? So I think just letting go a little bit and trusting the people that you work with and trying to promote them and trying to make them into leaders someday, I think is extremely important. But I think just letting go a little bit out of control, I think would really kind of help with adaptability. So you don't take it so hard if something goes wrong and something you plan for. Okay, what we know we've got a couple other things that we can do, and let's work together as a team to get it done. Versus why'd that happen, or trying to point blame at people, which is like the last thing you want to do, right? So.
No, that makes complete sense, and I mean, it really ties in well to communication, right? It's just you made a decision, went well, didn't go well. How do you communicate it? So, what are some other effective communication methods you would recommend that we use as leaders?
Yeah, so I think just the way we communicate every day, we need to think about a little bit. So oral communication, we don't want to use big flowery language. We want to keep it very simple. There's some theories out there about this that reduces cognitive strain of the people that are listening to you. So instead of thinking about what you're saying or wow, that was 4 syllables in that word, they're thinking more about what the message is going to be. And I think another interesting anecdote with written communication was Jeff Bezos and Amazon. So when he first started working at Amazon, he'd send memos out and he wasn't getting much response to the memos, or people had a hard time understanding him. And really, so he had the resources to hire a bunch of consultants, and he brought these consultants in, and they said, well, you're writing at about a 10th or 11th grade level, like about the New York Times is essentially what that is. And he said, any kind of communication, it's not disparaging the people that you're communicating with. It's just, you got, just like the saying, you got to keep it very short words, quick messages, and you got to write around a 7th or 8th grade level. People will get that. They don't get that cognitive strain of more focused on what you're reading, these words. Just get the message across and get it across quickly. He did that, and it worked very, very well. Very effective way to communicate, from a written perspective. I think also when we want to think about over communicating. So if you got a really important point, you don't just put in an email and say, I hope people see this and let's take it from there. But you want to talk to people, you want to get on a call, you want to meet in person is always the best thing to do, but sometimes it's not feasible. And the note on emails, though, is that you want to be a little bit careful with that. So I've seen some of the biggest mistakes made when people write an email with emotion, right? Happy, sad, upset, whatever. So what I tell people to do is make sure you don't put anything in that address bar, but write the email. Come back and look at it in 24 hours. I'll bet you 999 out of 1,000 times you're not going to send it. So you got to be a little bit careful about that when it comes to communication. So, but no, I think those are some things at least that I think about when it comes to communication. But trying to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, I think, and maybe it's just part of our training, but we really focus on sounding very intelligent, very eloquent a lot of times, but that does impede the message. And like you said, the short, succinct, just direct message, not flowery, not complicated. People understand your sentiment, understand what you mean, and then they can act on it. If they're trying to interpret and translate what you mean, that's not effective communication. So thanks. That makes a lot of sense. So we're basically saying that these great leaders, regardless of the business model, are great communicators. So all of us that are listening, or many of us that are listening, are urologists, and we're hardcore data surgeons, get it done. This touchy-feely soft skills. Can you talk about a little bit why we should pay attention? Why we just can't dictate what needs to happen?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things too when it comes to communication is your actions, and I think there's a lot of examples we can draw from. You can draw from athletes, you can draw from generals, from leaders. Not so much what you say, but what you do, right? And I think that really brings a whole level of credibility and integrity. So you can hear somebody telling you the same thing over and over again, but yet if you see that same leader doing what they're saying to do, that's great. Then you say, okay, I think that person's the real deal. And I think I can understand that. But if you're going to do something 180 degrees differently from what you're saying, then it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like, well, is this real? Does this person really care about what I invested in me and invested in my future and trying to get me promoted or trying to get me, up the food chain. So I think that that's something that you just want to be consistent as a person in your communication and your actions, especially. You can do it right a whole bunch of times, but if you don't do it right once or twice, then that's what's going to be remembered, unfortunately. So, but you're right. I mean, we can think about what we say, we can think about what we write and these things, but really how you act is where it's going to all lie. And I think that that's what people are going to remember the most.
Yeah, it's not what you say, what you do. That's life
Yeah.
lesson.
Yeah.
Life lesson. Well, how would you? So, since we're talking about communication, a lot of it is not unidirectional, right? It goes back and forth. So, talk about, is there a way we should ask questions that are a way that someone will give us not just the responses we want, but the real answers so we can help solve problems and help move things forward?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing is to establish a culture, whatever area of work you're in, is where questions are encouraged, right? I mean, I think that I can't think of too many things that are more uncomfortable if somebody gives a talk and there's no questions. Either the talk was just something so phenomenal that everybody got it, or everybody was asleep and didn't care. I mean, so I personally always try and make sure I've got a couple of them loaded up. But again, it shouldn't be forced. It should be a culture of listening and learning. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's where comes engagement. So to ask questions should be to be sometimes tough questions where you're challenging the status quo. But excuse me, other times it can be just questions just to start a conversation, start a dialogue, show that you're interested. They don't have to be, they should never be confrontational. They should always be just a way to start the conversation up and to introduce new ideas that you may have. Like you may hear a talk and think that, okay, well, that's something I haven't thought about, but maybe we can put these two things together. But I think the biggest thing is just doing it in a way that starts dialogue, but not to bring any biases in or anything like that, but just to start a dialogue. But I think it's always incumbent on all of us to challenge the status quo. What can we do to make whatever it is we're talking about better? I think that's important. So
I agree. I think sometimes with the back and forth communication, there is a little bit of fear if we don't have all the answers. And being able to say, I don't know, but I will find out sometimes is a little bit humbling. But sometimes you got to ask questions you don't know the answer to, right? That's how we move our entire world forward. All right. Well, as we have kids and we look at the development of humans throughout time, sometimes it is difficult to listen, right? We know what the answer is, we know what should happen. So how do we kind of become good listeners and take the time to really understand what the other person is saying?
yeah. So to be a good listener, it's one of those things that we're going to keep doing until the day we die because we're never going to perfect it. So it's always something you want to keep reaching for, is to become a better and better listener. But I think just some easy things, there's some initial things to think about a little bit are, again, you want it to be a dialogue. You don't want it to be confrontational, any kind of conversation. But to be a good listener, the first thing you need to do is listen. So don't just start talking, and then just give somebody a couple of words in and that kind of thing. But just listen to what they have to say. It works with patients as well, too. And I think it's important. Like when you go in that room, you're in a rush. You got 40 people in a day. But if you just sit down and say, "Hello, Mr. Smith, how you doing?" and you just let them talk for 2 or 3 minutes, they're happy. Even if you spend 4 or 5 minutes with them, they're still very, very happy. But if you just talk over them and tell them, "Here's what we need to do," and don't listen, that's when they get upset and they get a little bit angry. So I think that's really important. But I think if you just drop your biases, you don't judge, and I think you just listen to what somebody says, you may learn something. And if you're not listening, you're not learning. I think we've all heard that before as well. So I think if you're talking, I mean, you're just kind of you're telling someone your ideas, but they can tell that you're not really engaged with what they had to say or what they had to think. So it's tough. But I think as docs, some of us do administrative roles and leadership roles, but not to be behind your desk is not the place to be. It's to be walking around talking to people. That's where you get your best ideas. If you look at some of the CEOs, they say only about less than 10% of CEOs actually do that well, where they actually go to the root cause of the problem, talk to the people who are on the front lines and understand what's going on. And the problem is that is that that's where you're going to find all your answers, but that's usually the last place that people look, and they do all these expensive analyses and all these types of things. So really important just to walk down, if there's a problem, figure out what's going on, talk to the folks that are involved. And if you look at some of the CEOs that do it really, really well, that it's really encouraging actually to take a look at that. And we all have personal anecdotes as leaders of that working well for us. So, but that's the best way to understand problems and concerns, is just to go right to the source.
That makes sense. I've heard many times that people say that they feel that they're a better doctor when they have more time, when they just sit down and can just listen to the patient. And I think the experience that we have when that happens, we should definitely parlay into our other communications with our coworkers, with our staff. It's just, to be heard feels good. And so the more that we can work on that skill set, it's important. And I feel that what you were saying, and just about Bezos and other, we should probably consider ourselves CEOs of our individual practices and really work on our teams and listen and figure out how we can do things, how we can get ideas from other parts of our teams that maybe aren't leaders, and understand how to make all of the workflows better, how to make our practices better, how to do better for our patients. So I agree. Communication is essential. And we have a lot of opportunities on a daily basis to practice, and maybe we should practice some of these techniques. So I really appreciate all of your guidance.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you asking the questions, but I think, thinking about trying to wrap some of this up, is that I think it was Gandhi that said it, that you don't worry about how many followers you make, you worry about how many leaders that you mentor, how many leaders that you've influenced, right? And that's probably the best way to understand if you're getting your message across, or if you're how you work with people. I mean, I think if you are finding people that go to leadership spots, that you're people that you were a mentor towards, then I think you're probably doing it right.
No, that sounds very inspirational, and we all should have that goal. See where the people that we've mentored end up, and then you know what you've done in this world. So thank you very much. And thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez, for your time and your expertise today.
Thank you.
And thank you, audience, for joining us on the AUA Leadership and Business Podcast. Until next time, continue to learn, lead, and excel. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the AUA Leadership and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's insights valuable. Remember, growth is a continuous process. To further enhance your business acumen and accelerate your professional development, we invite you to check out the AUA Institute for Leadership and Business track on demand. Featuring 9 courses covering a wide range of leadership and business topics, the ILB track on demand will empower you to lead effectively and achieve your professional goals. Invest in your future and register today at auanet.org/ILB track. That's auanet.org/ILB TRACK. Until next time, continue to learn, lead, and excel.